Friends and folks, welcome to the Kaiju Lounge, your home for humor, opinions, and nerd shit. I'm your Boss Monster Noah Waterman, and my guest tonight is a podcaster, a YouTube critic, teacher, and a writer. The first 3 volumes of his self-published series, Primal Warrior Draco Azul, is online and available now, and I was lucky enough to get a little time with him at this year's Kaiju Brooklyn. Take a look.
And yeah, also a gachapon capsule machine that basically is, for $5, you get 1 token that'll get you a capsule that comes with 2 figurines, one of them being Draco Azul himself, and they glow in the dark.
Where does one just happen to fall upon a gachapon machine?
It takes a lot of time and a lot of research.
Friends and folks, please welcome to the show, Andres Perez. Andres, how you doing, man?
Hey, I have been doing great. Recovered from Kaiju Brooklyn. It was an enormous pleasure to be able to travel from from the West Coast over to the East and being able to meet up a bunch of old friends, make some new friends. Just doing what I do best, just shilling comics the best way I can. And after recovering from that, it's great to be able to be on here, getting to the chance to further talk with you about all kinds of stuff. And overall, man, I'm just feeling really positive today.
Good. How was Kaiju Brooklyn for you? Like, it was definitely, it's first off, it's a long ways to travel. I'm a native Californian myself, so I get it. It's a lot to get to the city and back. How was it? Was it a success? I would argue more so from your business side. I don't want to get you in trouble and ask you, was it worth it? But was it worth it?
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely it was, I would say. Honestly, I have been to a few small cons, big cons, and actually for a 1-day convention that was only being held for the second time in a row, it was honestly a lot better than other week conventions that have lasted entire weekends, because I have been to a few duds of conventions, unfortunately. But for a 1-day event, it's I did pretty dang well, all things considered. And as for is it worth it? That's a very interesting thing going at it, because it kind of goes more into my philosophy in terms of how I approach this sort of creative endeavor of mine, where I don't go in particularly seeking a profit. Profits would certainly be nice, but I always go into it expecting a loss, especially considering when you take into consideration, traveling, luggage, sometimes shipping stuff over in advance. It's you're not going to make all of that back. And so for me, a lot of what I gain from it is just the experience of it, just making connections with con goers, with other vendors, with, we were talking a little bit before, meeting old friends, making new friends. That's really the true reward from my personal convention experiences. And I would say Kaiju Brooklyn absolutely excelled at that in providing that type of environment that I would absolutely love to go again for.
That's fantastic, and that's great to hear. I'm glad to hear that. Was it your first? Were you at the previous year's event as well?
Unfortunately, I was unable to go to the first Kaiju Brooklyn.
Got it. So this was your first as well. First time being in that.
Yeah. I guess out of curiosity, have you been to any of the 3 All Monster Attack conventions?
So no, I'll be honest, I am not, part of me doing sort of the show that I was piloting out at Kaiju Brooklyn is trying to get myself to more cons that are kind of, I will say, out of my own, I don't want to say expertise. I grew up with a lot of Kaiju stuff, but I don't think to the same vein that would drive me to typically go to a con. And so for me, it was an experience of seeing how people really get into it and celebrate it beyond my own experiences with it. And I'm absolutely curious for sure. And I definitely want to. It's so cool to be a part of it, especially with the work I do with a Kaiju Big Battle. It's I'm getting more and more, I'd say, re-immersed back into this love from my childhood, which has been a great discovery thing for me. I'm looking, and listen, anybody who wants to fly me out, anyone wants to give me a call, throw a couple money my way, sponsor me doing it out there, I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to say no. It'd be, I would say, mutually beneficial. But let's get my subscriber count up first.
Yeah, I brought up All Monsters Attack because I feel like it was a very ambitious business decision from the Days of the Dead people. Normally they focus on horror themed, basically meet and greet conventions where they have a whole lot lineup of guests, but not a whole lot to offer beyond that. And unfortunately, it seemed like, given that there's no plans really for this year or even the next year for future Days of the Dead, I'm gonna assume that it was a very it wasn't a successful how would you say, endeavor for them. And having been to the first and the third All Monsters Attack, I can tell that, yeah, I can definitely see, I saw the writing on the wall there. And
Interesting.
yeah, I can easily say that Kaiju Brooklyn has, I feel like what All Monsters Attack did, I feel like they tried to do too much way too soon. And on top of just like a lack of marketing, a lack of just like advertising themselves to the locals in the area. Meanwhile, with Kaiju Brooklyn, I can definitely tell they were really trying to go for that East Coast audience, trying to like get themselves rooted in that how do you say, that community.
Yeah.
And I can definitely see them succeeding and eventually, as it goes on, as it progresses, to slowly but surely establish a strong following by starting out small and growing from there. Whereas All Monsters Attack attempted to try to do, in my opinion, like too much way too soon and not really excelling at they were trying to like shoot on all I forgot the phrase, shoot like on all fronts, but not really succeeding at any of it. Exactly, thank you so much. Fire on all cylinders, but not really, but missing every target.
Yeah, it sounds like they were like a fire festival of kaiju conventions. So it's see where that kind of goes.
I would say in terms of the third one, potentially, because that was, oh boy.
Well, so this is, so it's cool to hear, because I will say it was kind of my experience too. I'd done a lot of the big conventions. I mean, New York Comic Con, I've done E3 in the past and that kind of stuff. But like, I really find these smaller conventions tend to be more interesting because there is this sense of community. You go to a big con, and like it's every fandom everywhere. You may find your pocket, but you are not, it is hard to join a pocket or grow into one. Whereas something like here, I show up, I didn't know anybody except, my camera guy coming into this. And the people who were just super friendly, super chill, excited to talk about this thing that like everyone there was passionate about. All the stuff you hear about cons, I don't think the big ones. I think you see that at something like this. And so I want to kind of posit to you is like, you've done a couple of the other cons like that as well. What do you find, like, what is that secret sauce, so to speak? What makes these smaller cons feel so special and so different than the big fuck all convention centers to you?
I feel like when it comes to big conventions versus smaller conventions, I feel like when you have big conventions, you certainly have people who are there for a particular thing. And it's sort of like when you try to please everyone, you rarely do you end up like, or when you try to please everyone, you please no one. And so whenever I go to like a bigger convention, and that tends to be more for a broader audience, and that has a broader audience in mind, more than likely they're not going to really enjoy the thing that I'm offering, which is admittedly for a more niche audience, those who are into giant monsters, giant robots, that kind of stuff. And so not everyone is going to really be into that. You're going to have certain people that are into anime, certain people are into light novels, some people into video games, some people into Western animation or just blockbuster action movies, or any combination of the above. And so whereas with a smaller, more niche driven convention, there is a likelihood of coming across an audience that is or that is interested in your product, because it definitely caters specifically to that niche. And so that's kind of like what I've tried to go for in terms of like the conventions that I've been to, especially G-Fest. G-Fest is by far have been my most successful convention, where no other convention comes close to it. And it's great being at G-Fest in particular, because not only does it cater to Godzilla fans from around the country, it's sort of like almost become this sort of like pilgrimage to Mecca sort of deal. Everyone's coming in to this one thing because it's that one event that every Godzilla fan has to go to at least once in their life. And for a lot of them, they're interested in Godzilla, they're interested in Ultraman, and a lot of them are very much so looking for more. They're looking for like that next thing, big kaiju thing that they haven't heard of. So when they come across something like what I'm offering, or what my friends are creating, what they're offering, it's like, oh, hey, this is more of the thing that I like. This is exactly what I've been looking for. I want to support it. And that's like a very special kind of interaction that I don't see as often, at least from my own experiences from the conventions that I've been to, where it's not just the one niche thing that I tend to, specialize in.
Okay. So let's talk about that fandom a little bit. What drew you to giant mechs and monsters and sort of the I guess the larger tokusatsu style, right? Like how did you get into it? What was the thing that made you go like from just this is cool to watch to holy shit, this is my thing?
Yeah. So like I feel like a lot of Godzilla fans, I started out as a huge, fan of dinosaurs. Couldn't get enough of them, especially, as a 90s kid growing up, dinosaurs on all fronts. You had stuff Jurassic Park, Walking with Dinosaurs, Extreme Dinosaurs, Beast Wars, Power Rangers, all this.
I real quick have to stop, because this is probably the second
Yeah.
time in our interactions where you have pulled some deep cuts that have blown me away. That things that like you recognize Farmity from King of the Monsters 2.
Yeah.
When I brought that up before, the only person to know the creature. Extreme Dinosaurs coming up now. Like dude, the level of which these things have lasted in your head is quite impressive.
I mean, everyone brings up Street Sharks, okay? But honestly, Extreme Dinosaurs, that's where it's at.
Yes, 1,000%. I think it lasted like a slight bit longer too.
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
We're yeah, and yet no one ever brings up. It's like, oh, hey, Street Sharks. It's like, no, get that shit out of here.
It wasn't Jossum at all. No.
Modern man's got prehistoric company.
Well
Anyways,
played. All right, continue.
Growing up, loved dinosaurs. Eventually I got into Godzilla through these various VHSs that my parents bought me as a kid. Instantly was blown away by it because it was unlike anything I had ever seen before. Roughly at the same time, Power Rangers, I really got into those. Really, Power Rangers and Godzilla being my first big introductions to the art of tokusatsu. Later on, I eventually became familiar with Saban's Masked Rider, a little bit of VR Troopers. Definitely was a big Beetleborgs fan growing up.
Oh, yes.
And later on, I would say like Ultraman Tiga, that was airing on the Fox box back in the day. And so that was my introduction to Ultraman. And boy, for anyone who is growing up with all of the discotheque releases of Ultraman, it's like, you don't know how lucky you had it when you had to like growing up, you had to like hunt down volumes like 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the Funimation release of Ultraman Tiga.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, so there's a certain point there where, you name like all these shows, but a lot of the shows we're looking at were the American, Saban releases, where they're taking the old content and adding studio stuff shot here in the U.S. Is there a hit where you kind of realize, like, at what point or how far from discovering these things did you realize that this wasn't the original content? And that there's a whole extra library of stuff out there that wasn't as easily available. And how'd you get your hands on it?
So I didn't really, I never realized the origins of the media that I was consuming until I want to say well into high school, maybe like late middle school, early high school. So like I started high school. My high school years were from 2006 to 2010,
Okay.
and so it was then that I ended up learning more about the Godzilla online community, especially Toho Kingdom. It was around this time I started like using that as like my source for Godzilla information, learning more about the history of Godzilla, history of different releases, the latest information on the newest Godzilla DVD and action figure releases. Slowly became accustomed to using YouTube, learning about other YouTube content creators back in the day in the early 2010s, transitioning into college. So it was around like high school that I really became more interested not just in the Godzilla movies, but just the stories behind the movies, the people that made the movies, learning more about the likes of Ishiro Honda, Eiji Tsuburaya, the various library of actors and suit actors and artists that have all poured their blood, sweat, and tears into these projects, and it gave me a much larger appreciation for the art of tokusatsu. It made me appreciate the where these properties came from. And eventually once I got into college, that's when I learned more about like Super Sentai, about Ultraman, about Kamen Rider.
Right.
And that's kind of like by college is really when like the internet, I had more access to the internet, more access to streaming and
Right.
downloading. If you know, you know.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And also like,
Because none of this
unfettered
stuff was
access to
available
staying up late.
illegally. Yeah. So yeah, it just became this like rabbit hole that just swallowed me up. And at the same time, I was always big into anime, loved Dragon Ball Z growing up back in the day. And like I would say if Power Rangers was my gateway drug into the mecha genre, Gundam Wing and G Gundam were like
yeah.
the two shows that really like solidified my love for mecha anime. Eventually I became big fans of other franchises. 2013 was a very special year for me because that's when Pacific Rim came out, and it just like brought out that
Right.
inner child in me, and it really made me want to learn about like the inspirations behind Pacific Rim. Listening to Guillermo del Toro's various interviews, he would talk about growing up with Mazinger Z, with Gigantor, and that's what really led me down the path of the super robot genre, which was that old school 70s classic melodrama, good versus
yeah.
evil, over the top, action packed stories. I grew up with Voltron. A lot of people like from earlier generations grew up with the likes of Force 5 and Shogun Warriors. So I really became more interested in the old school stuff, and that's how I became a big fan of Mazinger Z, Guy King, Getter Robo, and eventually around this time I started attending G-Fest, and I ended up coming across other creators who came from similar backgrounds, creating something new out of their love and appreciation for what they grew up with. Stuff like Christopher Martinez and Jonathan Claude's Fire Beast Dorugan comic book series, Keith Foster's Kodoja Kaiju series, James Biggie and Frankie B. Washington's Robot God Akamatsu comic series, and the person who would go on to become my artist, Tyler Souls, with his Durantis the Lost Serpent comic series. And so watching all these people basically taking what they love and making something new out of it, I figured, hey, if these people can do it on the small scale, if someone like Guillermo del Toro can do it on the large scale, what is stopping me from trying my hand at it? And so that's ultimately what led me down the path to creating Primal Warrior Draco Azul, sort of like the culmination of everything that had inspired me up to that point, while also trying to put in a little bit of my own my own touch, my own take on the super robot genre and kaiju genres, and seeing how I can stand out, especially by mixing in a little bit about my cultural heritage into it to help it stand out amongst my peers, especially when it's just some element that I didn't see as much at the time. So ultimately, that's what led me here today, and it's been a nonstop, incredible roller coaster of a journey that I feel like, as I probably mentioned before in a previous interview, that I feel like I'm only getting started at this point.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So what was the jump into the actual business side of self-publishing and putting this thing together. I mean, did you know a bit, or had you worked in parts of the comic industry before, or were you really kind of, you had the idea, you had the story, you made friends with an artist, and were you kind of just going in blind and being like, let's learn it, there's enough YouTube tutorials, I can figure it out, let's learn as we go?
Mhm. Oh yeah, it was definitely more of the latter than the former. This was really my first foray into comics, into like I haven't into creative writing. I hadn't done creative writing since,
Oh, wow,
not
okay.
counting my YouTube stuff, which I've been doing since on and off since 2012. A lot of that stuff was mostly like scripted movie reviews or like unscripted podcasts of my friends and I just shooting the shit, discussing movies, kind of like what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
In terms of crafting a narrative, I hadn't done that probably since high school during those like creative, like English classes, creative exercises. So really a lot of it was trial and error. Thankfully, I had the guidance, the sort of like I was mentored by my friends, Christopher Martinez, incredible individual, truly inspiring, who's unfortunately no longer with us, God rest his soul. But he truly was the person that kind of like sat me down and was like, hey, Andres, I see you got this really cool thing. That was the thing, Draco Azul, prior to becoming, the titular mecca of my comic, he was my YouTube mascot. And he was
Oh,
like, hey,
wow.
Andres, you got this really cool giant robot. Oh, what's his story? What's the thing behind him? I was like, oh, I got this idea in mind for like a story. Oh, it's something. It's kind of silly. It's like, no, tell me. I want to see you write it. And I was like, oh, okay. If you think it's worth my time, I end up writing a short 20-page script. Send it over to him. Send it over to a mutual friend of ours, James Biggie. Both of them gave like a lot of truly truly uplifting positive reinforcement. They're like, this is great, I want to see you
That's
make
awesome.
this thing, this has potential. And like hearing that really motivated me to like, yeah, I can do this does look like something that's feasible. And Chris did set me he really talked to me, like real talk, and he was like, listen, Andres, before you go into this, there's something you need to know, and that is there's no money in comics. If you start on this path, don't expect to make a profit, okay? Don't expect fame or popularity or you're not going to become like the next like Ninja Turtles or Spawn. That's not going to happen to the majority of creators out there. You got to be realistic with your goals, essentially was what he was trying to say. And I was like, absolutely, I understand. And he was like, if you want to make this something, do it for the fun of it. Do it because you want to be able to say that you put something out there into the world and are proud of it. Essentially creating, it's art for the sake of creating art.
Yeah.
And it's that mentality that I've held on to ever since. It's sort of like one of those things where it's like, I'm going at this knowing that I'm making a loss, but it's being able to afford to make that loss. It's like I've got a steady income. At the time, I was an conversational English teacher living in Japan. I was living in Gifu City from 2016 to 2022. So I had a steady income and I could afford to invest in a side project like this. I understand that, it would be great if it suddenly exploded and, movie deals are made and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely. If an opportunity like that came by, I'd take that. But it's like, realistically, more than likely, not going to happen. So I'm just going to enjoy the ride while it lasts, enjoy the ride while I can afford to keep it going. And, for instance, I worked on issue 1. Issue 1 came out, immediately started work on issue 2. Then, by the time 2020 rolled around, COVID hit, money, became a priority where I need to save it. I was not in a financial position where I was able to continue the series. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to hold off, responsibilities come first. And eventually, I was in a position where it's like, okay, let's get the ball rolling on issue 4 now. And then eventually, moving back to America, and it's like, okay, I got to get myself reestablished now here now that I'm back in the US, time to put it on the back burner for now. Got to focus on those priorities. So it's, it's like those things where it's like, having it's as much as I want to continue doing Draco Azul and wanting to expand into as many territories as possible, be they, comics, short stories, novels, action figures. It's like, gotta take things one step at a time when the time is right. So that's just sort of been like my mentality going forward with it. It's sort of like, like all things, it's all like a balance, being able to know when is the right time to focus on certain things and know that when, real life responsibilities, have to come first.
Well, I find that super
I
interesting because you were just talking about this with Kaiju Brooklyn, and that philosophy seems to flow. It's like, don't just jump into the deep end, learn to swim. And it's a bit of the slow crawl, for lack of a term, it's almost earning the right to get bigger, right? Like it's like it's paying your dues a little bit, but just like not overextending yourself and letting, it's a plant, you're letting it grow naturally. You're not pumping it with hormones and hoping it, turns into Audrey 2 or anything.
Right. Like, for instance, this year, unfortunately, I'm unable to attend this year's G-Fest, because, again, I'm just not in a position where I'm able to go, which is why instead it's like, okay, I can't go to G-Fest, but I do have an opportunity to go to Kaiju Brooklyn. So if I'm going to go to at least one Kaiju Con, let's make this happen. And so, there we go. And like my friends over at Sakura Central, they offered to help sell my comics because they will be at G-Fest. So it's like, all right, awesome. Let's, when one door closes, another door opens. So I may not be there, but Draco Azul will certainly be there. So, it's all about, finding those opportunities, and being able to find alternatives when plan B when plan A doesn't isn't quite working out that way.
Totally. So I want to talk a little bit about your time in Japan for sure. Before I get into that, let's talk about that because you've been working with the Sakura Central guys for some time now, right? You do a lot of press releases. You've been part of that community. Let's talk a little bit about what Sakura Central is, your involvement, how long you've been working with them, and that whole thing. Because that's its own sort of wonderful little online. We talk about these small cons. It's a small con in a website. It is this great little small, even just kind of talking into Cuber at the con and checking out the website. The guys do so much over there. Talk about Sakura Central.
Oh yeah. Sakura Central was a very ambitious idea that my friend Nick Huber came up with, and he brought a bunch of creative individuals such as me and Daniel Meany together, and he was like, hey, I want to be able to create this community where we can celebrate not just kaiju but all things related to Japanese pop culture, Japanese media and whatnot, trying to bring together various fandoms and create a very positive community about it with this site. And ultimately what started as like a site has kind of like grown into other various enterprises. And I was kind of there. I was pretty much there. I was like a creative consultant, you can say. He's always feeding me ideas. I would give him my 2 cents on it. Me being a YouTuber and someone who's constantly promoting my stuff left and right on as many popular social media platforms as I can.
It's like hustle. Okay, you gotta hustle. Absolutely.
Absolutely. even knowing that again, there's no money in comics, but that doesn't stop me from continuing to hustle to make sure my stuff gets as seen.
And there's no shame on the internet. There's the 2 primary rules.
Absolutely. You see, over on the Monstrosities YouTube channel, I'm on their live streams. I'm on Matt Burkett's live streams very often, and so they've given me like the nickname of Shin Kamen Rider. I happen to be referred to as Shill Kamen Rider. I am the shillster. I am the master of shilling.
Love it.
We turn it in.
Love it.
I shill so much they turn it into a meme. It's like the moment you hear Primal Warrior Draco Azul, instantly in your mind, Amazon and Comixology. Boom. At least it's stuck in your head.
But that is marketing. You do that.
Exactly.
You've done it enough times that they already know it's like hearing the McDonald's jingle in their head whenever you say that.
Yeah.
It's
just already. It's like
I'm loving
the
it.
next
I
step.
am loving it.
Boom. So like, having seen, certain trends, having seen certain websites come and gone, it's like, okay, here's a bit of my insight into why this thing could potentially work, why that thing might not be such a good idea, or like, let's go and look into this idea or that idea. And yeah, eventually I started contributing to the website myself via the press release articles that I've written for them through Keith Aiken of Sci-Fi Japan. He gets in touch with Toho. He provides a lot of the press release information for various press releases for upcoming movies, mostly connected to already established, very popular anime properties like Detective Conan, Doraemon, Crayon Shin-chan. And so I happen to, try my best to sort of translate these articles, do a bit of research on what these movies are, what the franchises that these movies came from, look into a bit into who is working on these movies in terms of like directors, writers, special guest
Helping
voice
provide
actors,
context,
and be able
basically.
to. Oh, exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And be able to, write these articles that would then appear on both Sakura Central and Sci-Fi Japan. And on top of that, Nick Huber and Daniel, they're looking into the more like entrepreneurial side of things. And so that's where Kaiju Chaos became a thing, where they had this idea of, hey, let's create a gachapon or a capsule toy line featuring, original kaiju and various licensed indie kaiju or, kaiju related characters such as Primal Warrior Draco Azul or Matt Dinian's Atomic Rex. And working with other artists and in order to help increase the production values of these projects. And so they've got a lot of stuff in prepared in the future, so like I can't wait for them to continue working with them and helping provide the world with a lot of cool stuff that I'm sure they're gonna like.
That's exciting. I mean, I love you just talked with Nick a little bit there, the entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, first off, even some of this is started just a website, being one of the sponsors of Kaiju Brooklyn, like it's not cheap to do that. Like,
No.
it lays you out on a pretty top scale there. So like, I think, congrats to you and all of them for the work they're putting in. It's exciting to see what you guys kind of do with this as you bring in this community together. Let's pop back to the Japan stuff. So you spent 6 years, is that correct?
6 years, yeah.
So
yeah.
when was this? When did you get back?
Yeah, so I initially moved there in March of 2016, and I didn't
Okay.
move back until May of 2022.
Wow. Yeah. Oh wow. Yeah. So you were there at the height of the pandemic. You were there right when it kicked off
Oh
and
yeah,
all that.
yeah.
What
boy, yeah, that was
what was
quite
it like
something.
there? Because, I mean, Lord
Mhm.
knows it was crazy here, but like
Mhm.
the cultural differences between the U.S. and Japan, it can already be
Mhm.
shocking enough. Uh, I've only been once. I was always very impressed with how, you know, I always thought of Japan overall, especially like your major cities, almost being designed by really good developers, and that the UI doesn't always look great, but goddamn is it efficient. And that's kind of how I see a lot of that. So like, I'm curious, what was it like being in Japan, both in that transition from what we knew as
Mhm.
normal to what has now become normal?
Yeah. It was definitely like a sudden shift that no one was prepared for, much like, the rest of the world. And a
Yeah,
lot of
that's
people
scans.
had to get, yeah, a lot of people had to get like used to a lot of things very, very quickly. The toilet paper shortage that happened early on in America, that happened in Japan too. I started noticing like, what's going on here? What happened to all the toilet paper? Wait, and I started seeing signs. I was translating them with my phone. I was like, wait a minute, only one package of toilet paper per customer. What is happening here?
Yeah, but it's
I
different.
ended
It's
up,
different when your toilets are amazing out there, right? Like,
yeah.
it seems like we have to just splash water on our ass from the faucet. You have the full kit and caboodle as far as
Oh,
taking
the
care of
bidet,
yourself.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like honestly, I can never get used to those. But what was it? So our school was shut down for a month, And afterwards, so like all throughout April, the month of April, it was just like nothing. Just we were paid the school that I was teaching at. And I guess for some context, I didn't teach at like a traditional school. We taught at what is called an eikaiwa, or an English conversation school. And these are
Okay.
basically like 1 hour, 1 week, once a week, weekly hour-long lessons where we basically are either it's like one-on-one private lessons or in a group, anywhere, at least in our school, anywhere from like 1 to 6 students at the most. And these are like
Oh, wow.
small, like sort of like for children. These are like after-school programs, essentially. Parents want their kids to start, getting more hands-on, practical use out of
This is
English.
more
And
like
so this is just
extracurricular as opposed to like dating a class as part of their curriculum.
right, exactly. And we also taught adults of all ages. I was teaching, elementary school students, middle school, high school, college age, young adults, middle-aged adults, senior citizens, and a lot of them had various reasons. The adults especially had various reasons for why they want to learn English. For a lot of young adults, they want to be able to improve their English so that they can get a better position at their company, so that maybe with their English they can go on international business trips.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Or with senior citizens, they just want the chance to speak with a foreigner, or they want to learn enough English so they can travel the world, go to various go vacationing in various countries. A lot of them especially like to go to Europe. They like to go to like Germany, France, Italy. And English is like the one language that kind of like unites all of them.
Right.
So for the month of April, just no classes whatsoever. And by what was it, for the following months, May, June, July, a lot of our students had left because, of course, they were very much so on high alert in terms of like, not wanting to catch COVID. And our school quickly had to adapt, much like everyone else, in terms of providing virtual lessons, whether, we try to be as accommodating as possible. Some of them preferred private in-person lessons. Some of them preferred lessons over Skype. Some of them preferred lessons over Zoom. And again, we tried our best to meet their needs, to try to make them as comfortable as possible in order for us to continue our lessons. In some cases, we had like maybe a group lesson where one person was communicating through Skype, through my laptop, and then everyone else is there in person. So I'll have to position the laptop in a way where everyone can see the student, and she can see, he or she can see everyone else.
I tried to run a D&D game
yeah.
like that. It was a pain in the ass, so I can only imagine trying to teach.
Yeah, and listening from my other students share their stories as to how things have changed at the various companies they've worked for. A lot of them, international business trips or just any business trips whatsoever were completely gone. A lot of them had to learn to use, online services like Zoom for the very first time. Online conferences suddenly became a new thing that Japan was very much so not used to.
Wow.
A lot of them very much so miss the in-person business meetings, making those kind of deals by being able to get to know someone in person, maybe take them out golfing or whatever to really solidify that bond with them, to seal the deal.
Yeah, the culture of salaryman
out.
must have been completely different at that point, because you hear about it, like you're in person and you go to bars with it's all that corporate culture. Wow.
Oh yeah, the whole rubbing shoulders deal. It's like none of it is like is applicable anymore when you're talking to someone through like a sterile environment like the screen.
Right.
But in terms of like the overall outdoor sort of stuff, I remember there was a curfew. Every company, every business had to close its doors by 7 p.m. And so, like, for me personally, I don't cook, so I usually eat out. And so normally my classes would end around, like, last classes would end around like 8 p.m., 9 p.m. So by the time I finish, there's literally nowhere for me to get my dinner except maybe the 24/7 convenience store.
Jesus. Oh, my God.
But everyone was compliant. It's that type of culture where everyone does as they are told. If the government, they put their 100% trust in the government. If the government tells them to do this, they say, they will comply no questions asked. So if they were told to wear a mask, they wear the mask. If they told, to close your doors by 7 p.m., they close your doors by 7 p.m. There was never a mandatory lockdown in Japan. Rather, there were these periods of time where it was recommended that everyone stop what they're doing for a roughly, like, I want to say like a month or two, and then the numbers COVID numbers go down. They lift it. They lift the restrictions. Everyone goes back outside. Numbers rise up, and we start the whole process over again. So that was really, like, from my perspective, like I understand why it was done, absolutely, but it just became very exhausting to go through that cycle at least 4 times from 2020 to 2022. And, like, by the time I came back home in 2022, pretty much like 90% of everyone else was like no longer wearing masks, whereas I still keep in contact with some of my adults age students, and they're like, oh no, we're still wearing masks. We wish we were like America at this point. We want to just do what we used to do.
I mean, granted, we were barely wearing masks, like, in the throes of it. Like, it's like you described how, like, you could go back outside sooner, and it was back and forth. It's like, yeah, I don't have to put my kid on mandatory timeout when he behaves. Like, it makes sense. America did not have their shit together. We had our own problems.
Oh yeah.
So you were out there.
Oh, for sure, absolutely.
Your time out there. You had already been in the process with Draco Azul. Obviously, big fan, big kaiju fan, big anime fan. What were Did you get to sell a lot of your comic out there? What was the response from the Japanese readers, if any, that you got to discover? I'd be especially curious because you take something of theirs, and it's a very insular culture, and you brought in your culture from home into it. Was there for any of the Japanese readers, was there a bit of a shock? Was it a bit of confusion? Was it welcoming? I'd be very curious about that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So unfortunately, I had not been to any. I had not been a vendor for any Japanese conventions, simply just due to, like, the language barrier being the big thing. Like, I knew enough Japanese to get around, but of course, in order to sign papers and contracts and, talking back and forth via emails, that's just something that's I'm unfortunately not fluent enough for. But I have been told by a friend of mine who happens to live in Japan and is a vendor in Japan. He would tell me that, realistically speaking, my comic would look too American for most Japanese audiences to really be interested in. And it's like, you know what? That's totally fair. That's, you raise a very strong point. I can definitely tell you, American comics do not sell at all in Japan. I would go to various bookstores, and their American comic book collection, comics like, I'll say, like Batman the Killing Joke, or Watchmen, or Avengers. It's like they love the movies. Don't get me wrong. Japan loves American superhero movies, but in terms of the comics, they could care less. At your average bookstore, the amount of Japanese translated American comics is minuscule. It's like one single, like, shelf compared to, like, the droves and droves. It's not there. Yeah. So, they look at, if your average Japanese person who was into, manga and the like, or they were to come across my stuff, more than likely, realistically, they will say, oh, this looks too American. It's not really my thing. That said, I have sold my comics to my students. I would always share with them because, we have conversations. They share with me what they've been doing in their life. I share what I've been doing. A lot of them are very surprised that I'm doing something so, creatively driven, and which for them, it's like an impossible task. It's like, for them, it's like, oh, I can't ever dream of just making my own comic. It's like, for them, it's like asking them to, like, do the impossible. It's like, no, it's not the impossible. It's, if some schmuck like me can do it, anyone can do it. So I always loved sharing the creative process with my students because they don't know any creative types out there. They know other salarymen, they know other housewives, they know people who are into sports, people who are into people who are into painting, painting is probably the closest to that sort of creative side, painting or calligraphy.
Right.
People are just into experiencing media, not so much people who create media. And so I try to use this as a chance to help inspire my students, to let them say, hey, you know what? If I can do this thing that I've wanted to do, you can do anything that you want to do. And so, yeah, trying to use this as like a learning experience for them. And for them, like they would tell me, oh, what is this thing that, you're in? That's the funny thing. When we first start our classes, a lot of my adult students, the first thing would ask me is, what are your hobbies? Or why did you come to Japan? Their presumption being that I'm a foreigner, saying, did you come here because you like anime? I'm like, no, I came here because I like tokusatsu. And you're like, you know tokusatsu? And that's the thing. They have no clue just how big of an international icon Godzilla is, because let's face it, Godzilla is not very relevant at all in Japan. It's one of those like harsh truths I tell every Godzilla fan. And they're like, no, it's like, hey, that's the truth.
It's a symbol of a certain time. And I think the fact that we got something like Godzilla -1 or even Shin Godzilla, for that matter, was more of it's more of a callback than just the next step in Godzilla films, right? It's the equivalent of re-releasing. I'm trying to even think of what an equivalent out here is, where a movie that basically remaking a movie from 10 to 20 years ago. Like it's it is kind of a different experience. That being said, you want to hear the big man's doing better than he is culturally. We'd love to keep him in the zeitgeist.
Like I always make this comparison with my friends. It's like to them, Godzilla to Japan is like Popeye to us. We all know Popeye. We all instantly recognize him. But can you really say Popeye? There's a huge hardcore Popeye following? Maybe there is if you search hard enough.
Maybe
but
there is,
more than
but do you really want to
no.
hang out with those people? Like I don't know if I want to go to the Popeye convention. It's
That's
like people
Godzilla
who are
Japan.
really into the Smurfs. People who are really into the Smurfs. I'm like, that's a world in which I'm not willing to touch.
So, I tell my students like, oh, I'm into Godzilla. I'm into like the history, the actors, directors, and they're just like blown away by the fact that a foreigner happens to know more about this thing that came from my country more than a foreigner knows more than someone from the same country as this thing. They don't know that something like Power Rangers exists. And so I show them clips of Power Rangers and like, whoa, hold on. This is Sentai with foreign actors? Like mind blown stuff for them. But anyways, I would show them.
That's a fair point.
Yeah. It's
Why
like,
would they know
it's unfathomable. Yeah. Like apparently the Mighty Morphin was dubbed in Japanese over there, but clearly it never took off. And why would it when they got the real thing over there?
Right. That makes sense.
It's like, So anyways, like I would show them like Draco Azul. They're very interested. They want to know a lot of the inspirations. They're more fascinated by the fact that I know a lot of these sort of things, be it Ultraman or Getter Robo or like or Godzilla or Mazinger Z, and they're like more interested in like picking my brain, wanting to know how any of this comes together. And I even end up using Draco Azul as sort of like, this is also, take it as if you're interested in supporting me, you can use it as like an English lesson for yourself. You can read the comic, let me know what stuff you understand, what stuff you don't understand, and we can go over it together. Kind of like how there's a bit of a there's a bit of like a morbid curiosity too, just like how does an American retranslate this part of our culture and adapt it, right? Like I'd be curious. Going to a sushi place and see how they make a cheeseburger, right? Like it's I think it's the same thing. It's just kind of like, how does someone take something that seems so inherently one culture and adapt it, and build on it and take their own ideas. I'm sure it's very interesting for them. The best experience the best example of what you just said there was the first time I ever came across taco rice. Like at first I saw that on the menu. I was at like a cafe and I saw this on the menu. I'm like, what in God's name is this? It's like, as speaking as a Mexican, it's like, this does not look like a taco. I need to know what this is. And basically it's like all the ingredients that you would expect out of a taco, the lettuce, tomatoes, cheese, beef.
Okay.
It's sprinkled all over a plate of rice.
It doesn't even sound good. Like sticky rice?
Yeah, sticky rice. Yeah, the Japanese sticky
God,
rice.
Even worse. No, it sounds awful. It's just like a piece of lettuce with just tiny little grains just like stuck to it like flies on a fly trap. Like, oh God, no.
It's kind of like a like imagine like a Taco Bell Fiesta Bowl, but just the wrong kind of rice.
Right? Yeah, we got Taco Bell Fiesta Bowls at home.
Yeah, I'm looking at like that's not how you do a taco. That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
It's right. I'm in New York where they can barely do a taco right here too. As a native Californian, it's hard to get the Mexican food out of here.
It's same thing in Japan. Like you'll find an Indian restaurant on every corner of every street because they're for them. Indian restaurants is like taco restaurant, like taco stands for us in America.
Interesting.
Yeah, they love naan. They love their chicken curry. They love all that stuff. They love the tikka masala. And I grew to love Indian food through my time in Japan. The moment I came back to America, I started looking for local Indian restaurants, which unfortunately, growing up in Southern California, there's just like you had to take like a 40 minute drive just to find the nearest Indian restaurant.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Oh God, yeah.
But anyways, it's like, yeah, that's another key interesting thing about like my lessons, about my comic, is just being Mexican American, coming from a 100% Mexican family. I was able to sort of like this is going to sound super pretentious of me, so I apologize in advance. It's like being like a pseudo cultural ambassador in a way, where it's like I'm introducing my students to a whole part of the world that they never even once considered potentially exploring. Like, they know Mexico exists, but they don't know anything beyond the fact that it's there. Like how, let's say I can ask like your average American, hey, what do you know about the country of Turkey? I know that's a thing.
Well, America is such a melting pot, and like Japan really isn't. It spent so much of its history cutting itself off from the rest of the world. So it's like, I'm sure you were probably the first Mexican a lot of them met.
Absolutely. I mean, heck, I can tell you how happy I was when Pixar's Coco came out. I was like, okay, I'm making it mandatory. This is your homework assignment. You're all going to go watch Coco. I know you love Disney
field
movies.
Trip, baby. Let's go.
Yes, let's go. Go watch the movie.
That's right. You
and come
there
back
at the same
with
time.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like the perfect time. I'll be like, look, that's me. That's my people there. We made that.
Yeah. So I'm actually going in. Yeah. I'm actually going to Japan in October. I've hit the big stuff before, right? I'm definitely gonna go to Akihabara as a gaming nerd. I have to hit that up. I've done the Godzilla Hotel. Like any recommendations on like the less obvious level, right? Like I've hit the big touristy stuff. What are the good like nerd recommendations a step below that where I'm the only gaijin in the room.
Yeah. So a big thing I would highly recommend is Nakano Broadway. And I would say Nakano Broadway kicks Akihabara's ass like 10 times over. It's imagine like all of Akihabara. Oh yeah, imagine like Akihabara condensed into this like super department store where every floor is just more and more and more nerd memorabilia. And I'm talking like stuff like from model kits to magazines to like animation cells to various like high-end collector's price that goes in like the hundreds, if not the thousands of dollars. It's almost like especially the parts where they sell. I think was it Mandarake? I think it was Mandarake, like a physical Mandarake store. I could be getting the written name wrong. Where it's almost like stepping into a museum where you can see these vintage toys from like the 70s and 80s and even like as early as the 60s. Seeing some like vintage like Gigantor Astro Boy stuff.
Oh my god!
But yeah,
Yes.
Nakano Broadway in terms of like nerd stuff, that's like you really got to go there. Um, let's see elsewhere. I would let's see. I would recommend Nijigen no Mori, where the Godzilla zipline attraction is, but it's very
Ooh.
not foreigner friendly, especially in terms of
Mm.
transportation. Like you already have to, you can either pay like, I don't know, like maybe $60, $70, $80 taxi ride to go to that island. But then trying to find your way, if you're not familiar with the bus routes, it can get a little nightmarish trying to get back onto the mainland.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
oh, the life-size Gigantor statue in, oh, what was it? Where was it? I know my friends and I saw it on our way to Nijigen no Mori. Let me just quickly find this up. Tetsujin
Life-size Gigantor. That's
28
amazing.
statue. Let's see. Oh, Kobe. It's in Kobe.
Okay.
Yeah. The life-size Gigantor statue or Tetsujin 28 statue. That was
Yeah. That's
incredible.
amazing.
Let's see here. What was it? Diver City, or in Japan, it's referred to in Japanese, it's Odaiba, but in English, it's nicknamed Diver Diver City. That's where the life-size Unicorn Gundam statue is there, as well as so many stores there.
Yes.
I would have recommended Yokohama because that's where the moving life-size Gundam was, but it's unfortunately been taken down. Funny story behind the moving Gundam. It was originally meant to promote tourism specifically for the 2020 Olympics, but obviously the Olympics were pushed back, and it ended up lasting a good like 3 or 4 years as opposed to just that 1 year it was meant for. I believe the moving Gundam is going to be moved elsewhere. But I'd say keep your eyes peeled for when it will show up again.
Okay.
But in terms of like non geeky stuff, I definitely would recommend from my own prefecture, Shirakawa-go, which it is a bit of a mouthful of a name, but let's see, Shirakawa-go, just so I can spell it correctly.
Right.
Shirakawago. Shirakawa-go.
I don't know if the camera's picking it up. Knocked it out in the first try. I feel good about myself.
Awesome. So, like, Shirakawa-go is considered like a world cultural heritage site. It's probably like the most well-known thing about Gifu Prefecture. It's this like ancient Japanese village where there are these huge straw houses that have to be seen to be believed because they are like just absolutely incredible works of architecture.
Okay.
And like you go there and it's like you just traveled back in time to like feudal Japan. And yeah, I do recommend like checking out Gifu City, where I lived for 6 years, because it just feels like you're just stepped into a city right out of the Showa era. A lot of it has not changed a whole lot. You look around and you just kind of sort of feel that old school Japanese countryside energy from it. And, you will see certain like places like shopping malls, of course, will feel very fresh and modern. But then you'll check out some old school buildings, some old school communities, some old school shopping districts. And one time there was a movie theater. It was a movie theater that only had 2 screens. And this was like back in the day, this was the big theater everyone would go to for the latest movies. Before the days of like Toho cinemas and their like 20 screen movie theaters, where and the theater is still there to this very day. It was called Royal Cinema, Royal Cinema. And nowadays they do like screenings of vintage movies. And one day, I want to say sometime in 2018, my students were telling me that they were having like a double feature of 1 week. They were going to do Godzilla versus Biollante, and the next week Godzilla versus Destroya. So I got to see both movies in an old school Japanese theater on like an old school, what do you call like 8mm, those like old school 16mm film reels. and like I can see like I can hear the flickering of the old school projector
And the grain, it's like listening
the
to a
grain,
vinyl. Like, yeah. Oh,
speaking of vinyl, the sound was incredible off of those film
sure.
reels. Yeah, it was like the most amazing experience of my life, just being able to sit down and kind of like take myself back to like 1989 or 1995 and pretend that I am there watching, getting the vintage theatrical Godzilla experience.
That's awesome. Oh man, that what a wild experience. Get that double feature. That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's kind of it was really touching that for me it's like I quickly became known amongst my students as, oh, you're the Godzilla guy. We see something, we instantly think of you, and we immediately let you know.
That's so sweet. Even no matter
Oh,
where
for
you
sure,
go,
yeah.
that tokusatsu, the kaiju community is bringing
Hmm.
things together. I think that's awesome. That's what a touching moment from around the world. We're coming
Oh,
towards the
for
end right
sure,
now,
yeah.
man. But
Hmm.
real quick, I want to ask. I asked this before in person, and I didn't make it in the
Hmm.
video, so I want to give it to you now. What
Hmm.
is next for you? What is down the
Hmm.
line for you and Draco Azul?
Oh yes, absolutely. So like I'm currently working on it's funny that you mentioned that because I mentioned before, I spent over half a decade in Japan. I did my best to, I've embraced that culture. I was like knee deep in it. And sort of like the next thing I wanted to do was sort of like a tribute to my time in Japan. And so the next thing I'm doing is not exactly Drake Zul issue 4, but rather it's a one-off story of basically Draco Azul in Japan fighting off evil demons, characters meeting and embracing that Japanese culture, sort of like it's taking taking like how Draco Azul started off with me putting a bit of what I love, a bit of what I grew up on, a bit of my own, that the stuff of that Mexican cultural heritage stuff all in there. Now this is time of putting my experiences from Japan into this next thing as well. Sort of like writing what I know has always been one of my strong suits and has always been my approach uh to writing these stories. So it's like I want to do this one-off, this like basically this one-shot comic of Draco Azul in getting the chance to visit Japan and getting involved in this crazy adventure where it's like cultures meet, cultures collide in like the best way possible. And I'm already working with an artist, a different artist, just to provide this story with a bit different flavor to it all. And so the script has been written. I've been talking with the artist. We've been getting some preliminary concept artwork off the ground, and so it's something that I'm really excited to be doing again. I haven't written a comic since 2022, so it feels really good to get into that creative, again that creative mindset again. And in terms of a release, I do plan on making it as widely available as possible. So, unlike the previous 3 comics, this new Draco Azul or Japanese Draco Azul story will be made available on as a web comic on stuff on hopefully a platform like Webtoons or
Oh
even
wow.
Tapas. And just to make sure my fans can enjoy it, my former students can enjoy it, friends and family alike can check it out. And so hope and potentially, down the road, potentially sell it as a convention exclusive, sell physical copies as a convention exclusive.
Well, straight from the mouth of Shill Kamen Rider himself, immediately knocking out where to find the comic. Andres, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Where can people find you? Where can people find Draco Azul?
So they can find me over on YouTube at Kaiju Noir, Kaijunnoir, where you'll occasionally once in a blue moon find me just, doing live streams or scripted videos or off the cuff podcasts. If you've enjoyed listening to me for the last hour, which I certainly hope you did, then you can definitely see a lot more of this. You can definitely see a lot more of this over on my channel. You can also follow me on Instagram at Kaiju Noir, follow me on Facebook at Primal Warrior Draco Azul, and you can follow me over on Twitter at PW_Draco Azul. And as to where you can find my comic, you can find my comic both available both physically and digitally over on Amazon and Kindle.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. If you're still watching, thank you for watching. Please, of course, YouTube Shill Time, like and subscribe because that helps everything out. Boss Monster Kaiju on every platform but X because I can't have nice things. Until next time, Andres, thank you so much for joining me. For the rest of you watching, stay cool, stay hip, stay heavy, and good night.